Well, a survey report in Britain brings out what it calls anti-Hindu behaviour and racist mindsets in UK schools. Racism issues faced by Hindu school children and their families have been highlighted in this report. As per the survey by the Henry Jackson Society, 51% of parents who were surveyed said that their child faced anti-Hindu behaviour in schools. It also found that in the past, only 1% of schools with Indian students reported such anti-Hindu hate. Of a sample size of 998 parents across the UK, 19% said the school is able to identify the anti-Hindu hate whenever such an incident occurs. Only 15%, however, believe that schools adequately addressed such incidents. Another point that emerges from the survey is the spurt in bullying of Hindu children after Narendra Modi became India's Prime Minister and Article 370 was revoked. The survey is the first of its kind in the UK that talks about big loopholes in the religious education curriculum. The report also mentions a similar behaviour towards other religious minorities in the UK, saying such experiences of alienation and bullying tend to escape official notice. The report has also stressed on the importance of more studies on experiences of all religious minority students in the UK. It called for development of new methods and standards to report such incidents in schools. The report has also urged schools to take more proactive approaches toward identifying and preventing anti-Hindu hate in schools. And well, Charlotte Littlewood, political commentator, journalist and research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, now joins us for more on this. And Charlotte, thanks very much indeed for talking to us this evening. You say in your report that there is clear evidence of anti-Hindu sentiment in British schools, which in a sense means that this is racism towards one particular community. Or is UK facing racism against all minority groups in schools?
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. It's absolutely, there is prejudice between different groups in schools. Other reports have shown that there is rising anti-Muslim hate in schools. A report that I did last year looked at the rise in anti-Semitism in schools, 173% rise over 5 years. So absolutely, there are issues playing out between different communities and against different communities within the school setting. What really struck me with my findings for this study, which is essentially a series of looking at different groups and the treatment that they're facing in schools, what really struck me is that the schools had little to no idea that it was happening at all. When it comes to things like anti-Black racism, anti-Muslim racism, and even anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism in some points is a bit difficult, but definitely anti-Black racism and anti-Muslim racism, we see a clear understanding of what that looks like, and the schools are actually able to report that and tackle with that in a way that they are absolutely not doing when it comes to anti-Hindu hate. And I think that really comes down to an ignorance around the issue. And also the complex nature and the different ways in which it's manifesting. So the report looks at the different forms of hate that the Hindu community are facing in school, and that's coming both from Christian peers, Muslim peers, and white pupils in general against pupils of a different skin color. So we were seeing xenophobic racism, we're seeing religious prejudice, and we're also seeing tensions from the subcontinent playing out in the classroom.
Charlotte, also how widespread is this problem based on your methodology? And what is worrying in your report is that you say that in the past only 1% of schools with Indian students have actually reported such anti-Hindu hate incidents, which means there is widespread underreporting as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's really one of the most important findings of this study is we understand that minority groups face prejudice in schools across the board. But what we see here is the schools are just not identifying this particular hate. And when we saw last year the unrest between Muslims and Hindus in Leicester, we really need to get to grips and understand what is this, what are the underlying factors, and how can schools play a part in making sure things like Leicester don't happen again.
Right. And you've also presented a large-scale problem, obviously, which is prevalent in schools in the UK. How do you stop it, and why is it so widespread in the first place?
So I think the important recommendations are really couched around the UK's bullying policy in schools. So the bullying policy at the moment, schools have to have one, but there is no particular requirement for them to report on the types of bullying they're seeing, and nor is there any requirement to feed that information up to the Department for Education. So we don't have a consistent way of looking at what is happening within schools. So we don't have any way to know which communities are facing what kind of bigotry and to what extent. If we had that information, we would then be able to give targeted support to different schools. For example, if you had a school that was facing large amounts of anti-Semitism, be able to do workshops, maybe workshop with Holocaust survivors and things like that, to be able to support the school in that struggle and make sure that pupils there are going on to be cohesive and tolerant members of British society. So I think that's the key recommendation, is our bullying policy needs to detail the type of bullying that's happening in the schools. The other key recommendation is teaching on Hinduism was found absolutely below par. In fact, it was found to be feeding into the prejudice. So the way in which Hinduism was being taught from like an Abrahamic faith lens, painting on the idea of gods, God-centric, and even going as far as saying that Hinduism is polytheist and idol worship.
Right.
We had teachers that were saying that. So we really need to have a look at how Hinduism is being taught in schools.
Right. Right, absolutely. And thank you, Charlotte Littlewood, for joining us. Appreciate you joining us this evening with those details of the anti-Hindu hate that is prevalent in the schools in UK.